Good morning and welcome to the Point, our final program before you make some very important decisions in this upcoming election. In some ways, it seems this election has been going on for a very long time, but on the other hand, it seems like just a couple of weeks ago, we were chasing candidates around Michigan for the primary race. In any event, in 2 days, we'll know what happens in Decision 2012. And in this final week, before all of this activity takes place on Tuesday, there were some visits in West Michigan, including one from Ann Romney, the wife of Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney. She was in Grand Rapids. Here's part of what she had to say to a very enthusiastic crowd.
Thank you all for coming. This is wonderful. It gives us the same kind of energy and passion where we know something for sure. We're going to win next Tuesday. Now, a win would be nice, but a win in Michigan, that would really be nice. The sense that Mitt and I have of growing up here, loving this place, you know, just having the Michigan love that we have for this state, but also George Romney and Lenore Romney, and all they did to serve this state. Thank you. Thank you, George, because it would never have occurred to us to get involved in politics. Mitt would have been happy to have stayed in business and never even occurred to him to serve in this way. It's George Romney's example that brought us into this race. Thank goodness that Mitt's at the right place at the right time to save this country. Okay, someone said you got to do this. Okay. Wrong hand. I know better. This is a great sign. We all listen. You can't believe how many people I run across the country and show me their hand, which is good. All the fingers, thank goodness. It's great to run into Michiganders all across this country, and run into a lot of them in Florida, by the way. Which, by the way, we're going to win Florida too, which is awesome. So many of you heard me say this before, but you know, after the last race, by the way, Cindy McCain and I are going together around a lot. She's going to be with us, with me this week as well. It's awesome to have her with me. But after John McCain won fair and square last time, I got out a video camera like what you got going out here right now, and I made a video recording for Mitt. And in that, I looked in this camera and I said, guess what, Mitt? I'm never doing that again. I showed it to him, he laughed, and he said, Ann, you say that after every pregnancy. He had me there. But I'm so with him this time because I asked him this very important question when we were deciding as a family to go forward again. By the way, none of the daughters-in-law wanted to do this again, I can promise you that. They voted no. A lot of my sons voted no too, but this was the question I asked of Mitt, and I said, I understand it's very difficult to win the primary. I understand that. We've been there, I know. We understand it's very difficult to beat an incumbent president, but we're going to do that anyway. And then I said, but I have to know something. If after all of that, and you finally get there, and you turn to me and say, oh gosh, it's too late, can't do anything about this, too late to save the country. I want to know one thing from you, Mitt. Is it too late yet to save the country? He said it's growing late, but it's not too late yet. That's why we have to do this now. Because it is growing late, but it's not too late yet. And we have some guy right now that is going to take over in January, next January, and he's going to do the right thing for this country. I will tell you, I said this in my convention speech, one thing I know about Mitt, he will not fail. He will not fail. He knows how to govern, and he knows how to be successful, and he knows how to surround himself with good people. He also knows how to reach across the aisle and treat people with respect. Do you know, there's a lot going on in this country that's very upsetting. And the fact that we need to teach our children proper etiquette and manners and everything else. But it's so nice for me to know that everything Mitt does, I trust him, I love him, he's a good person, he's a person that cares. And I've seen that exhibited in his life so many times. And I was grateful frankly, for the debates to finally come, where all this nonsense about Mitt got pretty much cleared away very quickly.
In addition to a big race for president, there are all those ballot proposals. Governor Rick Snyder has weighed in on those. He came to join us to talk about his take on proposals 1 through 6. Governor, a lot of people have said this may be one of the most important elections of our time. Now, people like me, reporters constantly say that, but there is a lot on the line. I want to talk to you about the national implications in a moment, but let's start with something that you've been pretty vocal about. And you may disagree with this characterization, but I think you're not a terribly political governor. But you've been very vocal about the proposals and what you think should be done there. Tell me about your position on this.
Yeah, I have been, Rick, because it's important from a public policy point of view. It makes a huge difference. Michigan's the comeback state in the country right now, and some of these proposals could be devastating in terms of stopping that comeback. So that's where I've been very adamant. And the simple way I view it is personally I'm going to vote yes on one and no on the rest. And I really encourage people to get good information because so many of the ads are misleading. And that's why I'm actually doing this bus tour, is to say I want to be a valued resource and an aid to people going through this process to help cut through all that clutter and noise.
There is a lot, and I have the proposals here in my hand, there are a lot of union overtones in these proposals, which kind of suggest there is this union effort to push back against some of the things that have been done in the past 2 years. That certainly is their perspective. Do you see it that way?
Well, one of the big challenges, if you look at the constitutional provisions, proposals 2 through 6, I wouldn't describe them as union-oriented, but they're special interest. They're really special interest trying to embed something in our Constitution and sort of try to bypass the legislative process. The normal course of things should go through the legislative process. We should reserve the Constitution, in my view, for general government framework kind of questions, not put special interest measures, protectionist measures, measures that could cost taxpayers money in the Michigan Constitution. And that's why I'm so adamant about, saying no to these constitutional provisions. And again, I encourage people to do their homework and look at it.
I've asked a lot of people running for office, you're not on the ballot this year, but I've asked a lot of people running for office. So I want to ask you this. Is our process in the state of Michigan to get ballot initiatives in front of the people the right direction? In other words, is it too easy to get proposals on the ballot? And is that something that you would be in favor of looking at to change?
Well, my largest concern with how the ballot proposals took place, the petition system, is really the paid circulator part of this. In many respects, when you looked at it, they were paid a bounty per signature to collect signatures. And that's somewhat concerning to me because you wonder how clear or how accurate they're being when people ask them a question. Are they getting misrepresentations when people are signing these petitions? And we need to go look at that. I think that's a question that should be addressed.
Let's talk about this election in general. 2010 was a change election. You were brought into office. Republicans in control of the House and the Senate. All of the things that happened and all of the things that have happened since then have had a definite impact on the state of Michigan. 2012, whether it's a change election or not, is going to have a big impact going forward. One of the things that looms large, no matter what happens in the election, is sequestration, or the proposal, the prospect that there could be a lot of money cut from the federal government level, which will cut money at the state level. How concerned are you about this election and what happens after the election, no matter what the outcome?
Well, I am concerned because the sequestration concept, it shows what a mess Washington is. And our rough calculations are about $260 million of change in terms of our budget process. That's dramatic. I think we could manage around it. We'll do what we need to do. But as a practical matter, it illustrates how messed up Washington is. And that's actually an opportunity to talk about how good Michigan is, because we're the role model for what Washington needs to do. We had a huge deficit. We took care of the deficit. We've done balanced budgets. We're paying down debt. We've done tax reform. That's the short list that Washington needs to get to address. So that's why this election is critically important. That's why I'm a big supporter of Governor Romney, because we need to do things differently in Washington. It's not working right now.
On a much more local scale, you've got 110 folks over in the House of Representatives. Having 56 of those in the same side as you is a big deal. How concerned are you about House elections?
Well, I'm concerned about it, but I think it's going well in terms of most House races, because if you look at it, we have been reinventing Michigan. We are the comeback state in the nation, and we've stayed focused to jobs and kids, and it's important we keep that same team going. And so I've been very supportive of the House members to get reelected, so we need to continue this process because there's so much more to do. I'm fired up to keep going. Now's not the time to stop the reinvention. Let's keep going.
You and I have been observing elections for about the same period of time. And I joked a bit at the beginning that reporters, political reporters, like to always say that they're the most important. But when you look at this, particularly from a federal standpoint, is this one of the crucial moments from an election standpoint in our history, at least in the recent history of this country?
From a federal perspective, I would say yes. Because if you look at it, they haven't had a budget the last couple of years. You get to the sequestration, this fiscal cliff problem, you look at the whole system of the debt in this country, something needs to be done. It's not a sustainable path. We've got the greatest system in the world, but in terms of how it's working there, Washington is an absolute mess, and so that's where it's important people look at these federal races so importantly, and that's why it's great to have, again, Mitt Romney running, a good candidate there. There's opportunities to say, let's get on a positive path to reinvent the United States, just like we're reinventing Michigan.
As you can imagine, there is another very different point of view on those proposals, and you'll hear that when we come back to the point.
Proposal 2 is not about collective bargaining. It's already protected by federal law. It could cost taxpayers $1.6 billion, a special interest sweetheart deal, locked in the Constitution in good times and bad. Worse, the special interest went so far, Prop 2 could overturn 170 laws. The Lansing State Journal calls the costs potentially devastating. Leading newspapers and law enforcement groups say, vote no. Proposal 2, too expensive, too risky.
Next week, the biggest event in America is the election. But the second biggest is the 3-night voice event.
We are live.
The live playoffs begin Monday.
That's what I'm talking about.
Then on Revolution, for 15 years, they've lived in darkness. But this Monday,
we set out to invent a device.
the truth about the blackout will be revealed. All new Voice, followed by an all-new Revolution, starting at 8/7 Central. You must see Monday here on NBC.
It's how we do it in Michigan. Hard work every day. Getting ahead is getting tougher. Corporate CEOs get rich by cutting our jobs and benefits. That puts our future at risk. Collective bargaining protects us. It levels the playing field so workers have a voice and share in a company's success. It's protection against unfair layoffs or arbitrary cuts. Voting yes on 2 protects collective bargaining. Voting no puts it all at risk. Yes on 2.
Welcome back to the Point, our final show before Decision 2012. Just a couple of moments ago, you heard what Governor Rick Snyder had to say about those proposals. Well, there's a very different point of view, and that comes from Ed Kettle. He is on the Central Committee for the Kent County Democratic Party. Let's get your take on these proposals. There are 5 constitutional amendments, 1 referendum. We heard the governor say a few minutes ago, vote yes on 1, no on everything else, but you have a different take.
Well, I think that observing things, to me, it looks like the Republicans are kind of given up on democracy. I think Proposal 1 with the managers, the emergency managers, I get the angst, there's big trouble, things have to be fixed. But when you roll in some of these communities and take away elected bodies, you take away the power of the people, and that's really what we're supposed to be about. And I think that's the main argument, is restore the power of the people, bring in the expertise on a different level. So let's go back, rethink that, see if we can do that and keep democracy alive. And I think the same is the proposal about collective bargaining. When you take away the power of, we have a system of checks and balances. And when you take away unions out of that balance, then you don't have any balance anymore. It's a one-sided game, and that's not good. I get there's been arguments and there's been tactics that haven't been very good, but taking away that element of power and that element of checks and balances is essential. I mean, it will erode more into the democracy. So for those reasons, I think are why Democrats are really focusing on those.
Last week on the show, Mark Schauer, former congressman, former state senator, state house member, said that for 75 years, collective bargaining had been enjoyed by workers here in the state of Michigan, which is true. So why is it important now to put that in the Constitution if it's been working relatively well for 75 years?
Because of the threat of taking that away. This isn't overnight. This has been boiling for quite some time. We get that management doesn't like unions. They want to have control. They want to have the control to manage, and we get that. But without that balance, without someone there to say, no, here's the deal. We have to have safe working conditions. We have to have reasonable hours. We have to have reasonable pay. Benefits are a good thing. They're good for business. Without that power, then you're going to have everybody at-will employees. You'll have wages go down, work conditions fail. it just, you know, I don't want to be a predictor of bad things, but just look at our history. You know, where did unions come from? They came from the kind of conditions these guys are dreaming of now, where management had all the power and people had none, and the workers had to strike and organize. So let's not reinvent that wheel. We've got a system that works. Let's just make it work better.
There are 5 constitutional amendments that would make significant changes to that document that is the governing body for the state. Is it a good idea to try to make that much change in a constitution all at once, when just a couple of years ago we decided we didn't want a constitutional convention?
Right. Yeah, there is some reason to question it. I know that 5 and 6 particularly are horrible. 5 is bad. You don't want to ever have a 2/3 issue. That's just going to clog things up. That's the dumbest thing in the world, and it's primarily backed by the same guy who wants 6, because he wants to have that leverage.
And those are both from the Maroon family.
Right.
They own the Ambassador Bridge. 6, for people who may not remember, is about voting on the bridge.
Right.
And 5 would require a 2/3 vote to change taxes, not just to raise them, but to change the base as well. Would make it very hard to come up with new revenues in Lansing.
That's exactly right. And sometimes you get into shifting economies and shifting trends and things where the legislature has to have that power to move, have that liquidity to make decisions in a timely manner. And if you have to have that 2/3 majority and you can't get it, it's pure politics after that, and it'll really clog the works up.
All right, I'm going to shift you off the game just a little bit. We've been around politics for a long time. You've been watching these things for years and years and years. You get this many ballot issues on one ballot, it creates confusion for a lot of people. If people are confused, pollsters tell me they vote no. What do you think the odds are that a lot of people are going to walk in and say, too much, I don't remember, I don't understand? Not because they're not engaged, not because they're not informed, not because they're not smart, but because they got lives to live and they don't have time to research all of these. Are you concerned that, particularly for those issues that you're in favor of, that people will say, I'm just going to vote no on everything?
Yeah, I am. I mean, you and I, we do this stuff all the time, and I'm confused. So it is very confusing, but I think if people will take a breath, step back, think about their self-interest, and think about things that count, I think they'll come to the same realization. Just take an extra minute. There's plenty of information out there. They can go to your website, they can go wherever they need to be, and they can get the information. They can call their party, whether Republican or Democrat. They'll get some advice on the things, and I'm not telling people how to vote, but be as informed as you possibly can.
So there are 2 very different takes on the proposals. We started out this program talking about presidential politics. Let's finish it up that way by talking to Obama for America's deputy campaign manager, Stephanie Cutter. Ms. Cutter, for the presumably last time during this election cycle, you and I are going to talk about the state of this race. We're in the final days, final hours. Give me your take.
Well, you know, I think it's a close race, but I think that President Obama is going to win on election night. He's going to get a second term. Because the American people are coming out all across this country and voting for change. You know, the president is making his closing argument today and tomorrow, every day up until Election Day. And that's basically, the American people know him. They know what he believes and they know what he fights for. They know that what he says is what he'll do. And they don't know that about Mitt Romney. You know, Mitt Romney was against the auto bailout, for instance. Now he's trying to muddy the waters and criticize the president for his policies on the auto bailout. At the same day that auto companies are reporting their highest sales in years. You know, Jeep Wrangler, highest October ever in sales. So, you know, I think that is, that people are taking notice of that the president, you can trust him. He says what he means, does what he says. Mitt Romney, he's actually dressing up the same policies that crashed our economy, the same policies that devastated our middle class, and calling it change. Whether it's denying millions of people health insurance by repealing the president's health care reform. That's certainly change, but it's not the right type of change. Or repealing Wall Street reform and letting the Wall Street go back to writing its own rules. That's change, but that's not the right type of change. Those are exactly the policies that crashed our economy, and we can't afford to go back.
I know that when you get together with the other advisors in the Obama camp, you look at that electoral map and you look at Florida and North Carolina and Virginia and New Hampshire. You look at Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin. Talk to me about the path. I mean, it's got to be difficult when you see places, and again, these numbers change almost by the minute, but at one point Virginia was leaning towards Governor Romney by 1/2 of a percentage point on average. How tough is it to gauge these swing states?
Well, you know, Rick, we actually have multiple paths. to 270. That's how we've built this race. We've been on the ground in these states, in some cases, for 5 years. We know the voters. We've worked with the voters. And there are multiple pathways. In every single battleground state right now, we're either basically tied or ahead. So we have multiple pathways. North Carolina, for instance, we're beating Mitt Romney in early vote significantly. We have a huge margin. So we have a number of different ways to get to 270. And of course, we're counting on Michigan and being in our corner, and we think that it will be. I think that the opposite is true for Mitt Romney. No Republican has ever won the White House without going through Ohio. They're behind in Ohio, and for very good reasons, as you and I have already talked about. Mitt Romney doesn't have an agenda or a vision that would strengthen middle-class families in Ohio, that would lead to more manufacturing in Ohio, or even job creation. Their paths are dwindling by the day. Our paths are really expanding.
Let's talk for just a minute about post-election. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but no matter what happens in this election, it occurs to me that the next president of the United States is going to be elected by a relatively narrow margin. It isn't going to be that kind of mandate that we saw 4 years ago. How does that change governance going forward?
Well, the president has laid out his vision for a second term. And it includes bringing people together and forging compromise around some shared goals. Whether it's, making sure we have the best trained workers in the world. That should be a shared goal. Or finally investing in nation building here at home after a decade of war, more than $1 trillion spent on 2 wars. We need to invest that money here back at home. The president has a plan to invest that money in roads, bridges, highways, putting construction workers back to work. That should be a shared goal. So regardless of the margin that the president wins by, he is going to work to bring people together and continue moving this country forward.
The Republicans are likely to hold the House and Democrats are likely to maintain in the Senate. So won't some of the dynamics be the same as they are now?
Well, just because Republicans may hold the House or that there's a tight margin in the Senate doesn't mean that people shouldn't come together and work together and find ways to move the country forward, regardless of what those margins are in the House and Senate. And I think that regardless of how close it is, this election is going to send an important signal that the American people are tired of the same old politics in Washington. They're tired of Republicans listening more to extreme elements in their party than the majority of the American people. And I hope that everybody hears that message, because we can invest in our economy, we can invest in our small businesses, we can double our exports, we can build that economy that's meant to last with a strong middle class at its core, if we drop those ideological stalemates and come together to move our country forward.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to talk to you a little bit about history. This is not the first time that you've watched from the closest inside circles a presidential campaign. Tell me what this election cycle has been like versus 4 years ago, versus 2004. What is different about this year? Because there's something, as a reporter who's covered these things for more years than I care to admit, that just feels different.
Well, what do you think feels different?
It just seems to me that this is such a closely divided race that it seems to me it's very hard to get a handle. When I look at numbers, when I talk to voters, it's hard for me to get a feel of the direction because the numbers are so close and so changeable.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly we've been in this place before. The country, there are very few undecided voters in this country, and we're both battling for those few remaining undecided votes. I think that there's a lot at stake in this election. Some of the biggest choices that we've ever faced are at stake in this election. We have a choice. We have a choice of going down a pathway of investing in our country, creating jobs in this country, bringing American jobs back to this country, strengthening the middle class, making the investments we need, moving this country forward, or we have a choice between going back to the same policies that crashed our economy in the first place. I think every election there's a lot at stake, but this one there are 2 fundamentally different visions of how to grow this economy, 2 fundamentally different visions of how to move this country forward. So I think it's an incredibly important election. I actually, Rick, don't think it's that close. I think that if you look at, this race actually has been very stable. The president has had a significant lead, or a solid lead, in battleground states. And you can see it in some of these states in the early vote. You know, in some cases, we're beating Mitt Romney in the early vote by 3-1. In Ohio, for instance, because of the number of people that have come out to vote, 2-1 for the president. Mitt Romney, just today, and there's early vote through the weekend up until Election Day, he has to win 53% of the vote. That's going to be very difficult for him. I actually think this isn't going to be that close of a race. I think the choice is pretty clear. And you can see that in the number of people that are coming out to vote early.
Stephanie Cutter, not only today, but throughout this election cycle, you have been very generous with your time. Thank you very much. Thanks for your perspective. On Tuesday night, we'll find out if you were right.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you.
So there you have it, a view on the election for president, those big proposals, and there is so much more. We'll be back to talk about that next. To the point.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
When the auto industry faced collapse, Mitt Romney turned his back. Even the Detroit News criticized Romney for his wrong-headedness on the bailout. President Obama took a stand for American jobs.
Don't bet against the American worker.
And Michigan's auto industry is back. So remember what Mitt Romney said.
That's exactly what I said. The headline you read, which is said, "Let Detroit go bankrupt."
And what President Obama did for Michigan.
Citizens of Southwest Michigan face a clear choice. Stand up for kids or CEOs. Jace Bolger voted to give corporate special interests a $1.8 billion tax break, paid for by cuts to local schools, making it harder for our kids to get the skills they need to compete for jobs, while rich CEOs get even bigger bonuses. Tell Jace Bolger to stand up for kids, not CEOs.
These are tough times, so we've had to tighten our belts. And Holly Hughes makes tough times even tougher. She voted for a $350 million tax on retirement income. And thanks to Hughes' vote, middle-class families got a $1.4 billion tax hike. And Hughes did it to pay for a $1.8 billion tax cut for big corporations. Holly Hughes put the corporate special interests first. And now we're paying the price.
In just 2 days, if you haven't already, you'll be heading to the polls to make some very important decisions. If you still have questions about candidates or proposals, I urge you to go to woodtv.com. There we have a complete election guide. Just click on Politics. You'll find all the information you need. And stick with us on Tuesday night for the most comprehensive coverage of Decision 2012. And next Sunday morning, we'll take a look back at what happened right here, 10 o'clock.